You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos and Satch Purcell. Our guest today is Petalyn Albert. Now, Petalyn is a good friend of ours. You could say she's part of our tribe. She's also a certified divorce coach, among many other things. And she's a very compassionate and deep thinker, and we like to get into it with her. This episode, we're talking about shame and forgiveness, and also warrior women. So let's dive in.
Good evening, Satch.
Good evening, Carlos.
And good evening, Petalyn.
Hi.
Hey.
Good evening.
Welcome back, Petalyn.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to be here.
It's cool to have you.
So, Petalyn and I had a wonderfully exciting lunch. Wouldn't you say?
It was.
We had a lively discussion about things, and the subject of forgiveness and also the subject of shame came up. We were delving into the origins of these things, and so why don't we just dive into that? So what is it that has struck your curiosity and your interest about these things?
Well, since I was a little girl, I have been trying to find that $1 million question. What is it that we really, as human beings, have trouble with? I keep thinking that if we get deeper and deeper and deeper, we'll simplify and finally get to the one thing.
Unified field theory.
That's right. And so it's a conversation I've had all my life. And once I got back from New Zealand, in New Zealand, I dealt with an issue that I had shame around, that I had no idea I still had shame around. And it got me thinking how in our culture today, now I have to preface this is my experience, my take on things. I am not a psychologist. I am not a doctor of research. I am not anything. I am ground zero, like every other human being, reflecting on life as I'm experiencing it, seeing it, and as it's coming to me. So it got me thinking when I got back how many of us and how often the topic or the issue of shame comes up dressed up as other things. So we never actually recognize the shame factor.
Like what? That's very interesting what you're putting out there.
Well, so many people that I talk to in my work and in all the different tribes that I'm a part of, they're very high achieving, and yet they're coming to me because they're working something out. Something's holding them back. They have feelings of inadequacy, and yet they all resist admitting that. While they're sitting in the seat in front of me, coming to me for some sort of assistance or support. And I identify so much with what they're saying. I don't want to admit that I have shame around anything. I figured, I dealt with all my shame issues as a kid. I dealt with all of that. I've had a lot of work. I've done a lot of work. My facelift is just perfectly fine. I've wiped the shame off my face.
Yeah.
Petalyn, do you think that's maybe, or what are your thoughts on this idea that it's because shame is so often associated with hiding? It's like secrets and hiding, and it's supposed to not be shown.
And guilt, exactly. It seems like the worst possible thing that you can feel, and if you feel that, then there must be something really bad that you're hiding.
Yeah, and God forbid if anybody finds out.
And God forbid anybody finds out. So we don't want to associate with shame. We much rather, as we were saying earlier, say that I'm a workaholic. I'm a high achiever, so I have a high stress level in my life. It's sort of saying I have issues, but these are issues that I'm really actually proud of because they help separate me from everyone else.
So they're kind of putting up a smokescreen when they come to you, in a way, which you have to kind of get through in order to even help.
Well, you do have to get through it, and they're not doing it deliberately. They're really sincerely trying to figure out what the issue is, but they don't realize that the story they're telling themselves is a thing that's getting in the way.
It's a compulsive behavior. They're not doing it on purpose. It's just sort of their default.
Right. I'm having these issues. I don't understand why I have other issues.
Yeah.
What's going on? And it seems to me that the original issue, the original negative feeling that we have, the original one is shame. And from there, all things come. We were having this conversation earlier, and I tried to take it back to the book of Genesis, right? Now, I'm fascinated because I've never read the Bible from cover to cover. I've tried, it's just not my thing, right? But I suddenly, with this topic of shame, it's suddenly somebody, an angel, whatever, said to me, was that the first emotion spoken of in the Bible? And so I suddenly got very interested in the Bible, and I went back to the book of Genesis, and I'm like, holy moly, yeah. It's the very first emotion spoken of in the Bible.
Wow.
When after they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve went into hiding, and God, was looking for them one day, couldn't find them, and looked everywhere, called to them, and finally Adam and Eve came forth, and God said, well, where were you? What were you doing? And they said, well, we were hiding. God said, well, why? And Adam and Eve goes, well, because we were naked. And God said, who the F said you were naked? What's that concept about?
He literally said, who the F? Yeah,
said
did.
You were naked. It was just like, what dropped that into
God's
the space?
God's a gangster. That's why he's a G.
God's totally gangster,
right?
man.
What up, G?
And that's just how I read, just the personality I imbued into the whole thing, right? It's like, who the hell told you were naked? That's not a concept I taught you,
This is you.
Right.
I'm picturing Morgan Freeman saying all this. That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
With his cap turned backwards.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, he turned his cap backwards to say that.
With the pants sagging,
That's right. Yeah. And, and then, of course, they hid themselves in shame, and then they were banished. And my mind sort of went from there to, well, what happens after that? You're banished. If there's a parent and there's children and they've done something wrong, but they don't want to admit necessarily that they've done anything wrong, they're banished anyway. So there's not a whole lot of recourse. They are set on a journey to go and work it out themselves, right? What do we as humans, what are we doing these days, in a similar behavior? We'll keep moving forward, we'll justify, we'll continue to seek more knowledge, which we're doing, technology,
we
all kinds of things.
I mean, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally too.
Right. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where we no longer even acknowledge our shame, whatever the original shame is in our lives. Mm-hmm. We've dressed that up too. You know?
That's probably the most, like when you think of a buried emotion of some kind, it's usually shame. Right. Not that there aren't other buried emotions, but a lot of times, very often, it's a shameful thing that you don't want to admit. Right. And often it's shame that is the kind of shame that other people would say, that's not your fault. You didn't do that to yourself. That's not something that you would even need to feel shame for. And yet, what you're saying, it's true.
We do. I think that we inherit a lot of shame too. There's inherited shame.
Let's get into that too. Because this whole idea of inheriting, not just genetically, but like the way we model the people around us, especially as children, and we're figuring out how the universe works, and we're so highly impressionable. That too, that kind of absorbing, psychologically inheriting. There's almost an expectation sometimes with family members. You're just like your grandfather. You're just like, and whatever it is that they're seeing when they say that, that becomes yet another powerful suggestion to the person hearing it. So if that person has negative traits, it would be easy for the mind to kind of just sort of gravitate to all of it without a filter in some respects, at least at some stages.
Yeah, we can be hit by the shame ray in a number of ways.
The shame ray.
Shame ray. Pew, pew. Not quite sure what color that one is, but
whatever it is, it's a crappy color.
It's really red.
It's red
because it makes you blush. Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. So I've been noodling on that for quite a while now, and I've also been noodling on forgiveness because I'm not satisfied with The way I've heard forgiveness explained by just about everyone, it just feels like there's a huge leap between feeling unforgiving.
What is that? That, if you don't mind me asking, like, what's most people's opinion, like, idea of forgiveness? Let's maybe talk about that for a second.
Well, what's your definition of it?
Well, my own definition, or what I think
what do you think? Let's start with what you think others say.
My impression is that most people think that forgiving is something that you do more or less in your head. And it's almost like you're giving that person a pass, but it doesn't really address the feelings inside of having been slighted or wounded or being upset and angry or violated, whatever. My definition of forgiveness is evolving, but currently it's this idea of canceling the feeling inside of the wound and reaching a place of dissolving that energy and freeing up that space so that whatever it is that is me inside can expand and fill that space.
For me, forgiveness has always been sort of, I guess, a new agreement about the future that we make in a particular present, right?
That. Yeah,
so it's kind of like,
that.
okay, I feel wronged, hurt, something, perhaps from something that somebody did in the past. And then forgiveness is about us making an agreement about how the future is going to be different, right? So that we can have a future, you know? So to me, forgiveness is somewhat contractual, right? It's something of a contract, right? But if I were to sort of investigate my inner emotional side of forgiveness, I think that forgiveness is reconciling the pain of a wound. So if I have a physical injury or something, you know, sometimes we have pain, and you and I did a whole episode on pain.
Yeah.
Right? Pain versus suffering. And I think that's relevant to this conversation because when a person is experiencing the emotional pain of feeling wronged about something, the pain of that may get better or the pain of that may persist, right? But when a person changes their own relationship to the pain, then that could be forgiveness, right? So let's say Petalyn called me a big fat ninny, and that hurt my feelings. And I said, hey, that hurt my feelings. And she says, I'm sorry. I was just joking, but I see that hurt you. And so I say, hey, no problem. Forget about it, right? Now, the forget about it is a forgiveness, and we're looking towards a new future. She's armed with this new information that I'm super sensitive to being called a big fat ninny. And we can proceed, right? And then I've changed my relationship to the pain, even though it may still hurt, right? So, because that's why I think sometimes you wake up one day and you realize that I must have forgiven that person somewhere along the line because I feel differently about it. And then at other times, you actually have to make a conscious choice, even with that person in their presence, you know? So to me, it's very much, like I said, it's a future contract between between me and that person, and it's a reorganization of my own reaction to my own pain that I felt from it.
Satch, you said earlier about a contract.
Yes.
Is this a contract between you and that other person, or is it a contract between you and the experience of the pain, or what did you mean when you said there's a contract?
Yeah,
okay,
both. So I think between me and the other person, we've made a contract that, you know, we agree that we could have a better future, right? Hey, I'm sorry. I'm not going to treat you that way anymore, right? Let's have a better future where I don't treat you that way. You know what I mean? And in some ways, that's what I mean.
Got it.
But then I've also made a contract with myself, right? Hey, I'm going to approach the discomfort I feel about what happened inside myself differently. Now, if that person burns me, let's say again, then I can go, hey, they burned me. They broke the contract. But I've already reconciled how I feel about the situation. So I forgave them. It's done. They somebody harmed me somehow again, then okay, then now cognitively I can move in a different direction for that person, but I don't feel any more. I don't feel like a sucker anymore because I'm like, hey, I held up my side of the bargain, the part with myself, So yeah, I would say it's both.
So you have managed feeling like a sucker. You've removed the risk of feeling like a sucker, which, if I'm assuming, might create a shame factor for you if you felt like a sucker.
Sure. Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, the shame would be around maybe like if I felt like a sucker, then maybe that is me saying that, hey, you should be smarter.
Right.
You should be more savvy with people. Your dad told you not to just trust everybody who comes around the corner. You know what I mean? And then you start, the inner mother superior starts to wag her finger. Yeah.
What I love about what you said is that in that contract with the other person, you're actually foregoing the need to shame them for what they have done.
Yeah.
Or feel shame yourself because you're taking care of that in a contractual way within yourself.
Yeah.
So you're completely displacing that, taking that out of the equation, which is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. And I think where that comes from for me is let's say Carlos, who's a smart, intelligent, emotionally balanced human being, were to suddenly call me a big fat ninny, right? And it hurt my feelings, right? Coming from Carlos, who's intelligent and, should know better, right? Versus coming from somebody with an intellectual disability, who's mentally impaired.
Me. So.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Coming
right.
From me.
Okay. All right. I like to think of. I often many times throughout my life, I've had the image of if I was with a person who maybe had Down syndrome, and that person got very frustrated and upset and threw a punch at me. I have an understanding automatically that this person is dealing with limited emotional tools inside. So the punch that they throw at me does not have even close to the same impact as somebody who shouldn't be throwing a punch at me, right? So I'm like, hey, it's all right. I understand this person, so it's really never about the thing that the person did. It's about the intent.
Yeah. So you're bringing to mind the idea of compassion right now. We have compassion for this person who is special needs, right? Because of what? We've made the decision to have compassion for that person. Our model of the world allows for us to have that compassion for this individual. It's as though, we're, making assumptions that we know their model of the world, or that we know, in a sense, what they've gone through. We know a little bit about them. We've humanized them, I guess, to use another word. And we choose to be understanding, not just empathetic, but we choose to look at this bigger picture, this compassionate bigger picture. And so we have a lot more patience for those kinds of situations. But the real question comes in, like maybe more addressing like what you're talking about, Petalyn, is we kind of need to do this with everybody. Or it seems like it would be the best if we could do this with a lot more people. And not just those situations, but what about the guy, who doesn't seem like he's got Down syndrome or other problems and maybe cuts you off or cuts in line or yells at you or
I'm just going
something.
to interrupt you right here, Carlos. I'm teasing you. No, I agree. And the thing that comes to mind is that, we're all handicapped in some way at any given time. Amygdala hijack, stress, just having a funky day, personality disorder, just not a nice person, just, didn't know I was looking at you funny, just was thinking about something entirely different. I mean, like you said, compassion. We're not perfect human beings. We are flawed. And I don't mean flawed as in bad, just we're different. So the way that you brought that up, a person with Down syndrome or anything else, a dog or a cat or, something that we tend to have more compassion automatically to, you're right. It makes sense to extend that to us, to all of us, because the assumption is that person is perfect. They should know better. Well, they don't. In that moment, any number of things can be happening. And what I love about your approach, Satch, is that my definition of shame that I've come to right now, as you so well said, is the relinquishing of the need to shame the person for having wounded us. It's almost like that's what is necessary for me anyway to release to release my resentment, or to release the emotion, the root of that boil that will continue to produce if I don't clean that out. You know. So and I know that if I have released, and it's maybe a litmus test too, that if I have released the need to shame them in some way, you know, by the snide remarks, or, you know, just the holding of the distrust, or whatever it might be, then I'll know that I have actually forgiven them. Because in releasing them of that, I'm also releasing myself from feeling the shame around, like, for instance, feeling like a ninny for having allowed something to happen.
Yeah.
So again, for me, it comes back to the shame, the root feeling of anger, or resentment, or frustration, or anything like that.
So what feeling, or how does it occur where you get to that point where you can relinquish the need to shame another? What drives that?
Looking at one's own shame. I mean, we have to start here, you know, because we don't know what has gone into the actions of another. Really, we don't have that entire recipe. So first, for me, it's about acknowledging that there is shame somewhere deep down, deep down underneath it. Even if it's dressed up in a lot of other things, it feels completely justified. To find what exactly I'm ashamed of. You know, what is it? What do I think it's saying about me? You know, and get to that. And if I can work on that, that's the healing point. That's ground zero right there. That's where the bomb explodes. You know, and if I can work on that, then in a sense, working on that automatically ends up releasing my desire and need to shame them and to make them wrong, and therefore me right. You know. To relinquish my responsibility for what has occurred, for my part, my capacity to heal myself. You know, so much of blame is really just about diverting the responsibility of looking inside. Right?
Does that indicate that compassion arises from once you release that need?
Yeah, I think, well, for me anyway, I think finally getting to the place where we can admit that there's shame. And as we've said, sometimes it's shame that we've made up, you know, or it has nothing really to do with us. It's shame we've taken on somehow. So for me, the topic of shame in my life has come up for a lot of different reasons, and one of the biggest reasons has been around sexual abuse. So really getting deep down into why I may feel angry for something entirely different may very well, often does, come down to what's the original thing I'm ashamed of. And the original thing that I am ashamed of is that my father, pretty much abandoned us, my mom and I, when I was 3. And so I have shame around not being good enough. And no matter how healthy I get and how, you know, gregarious I am and how, you know, successful I might become, there's always going to be that original wound that at any given time can create the illusion of shame throughout any number of situations. And then, of course, you know, you take that shame into other experiences that we have as we grow up, whether it's sexual abuse or incest or any number of things, you know, and you build on that. But all of those things are just capitalizing on that, on something that's quite old and quite original and didn't really start with me, right? So bringing compassion into the picture in recognizing something that old and that impersonal, really, one can then have more compassion for I can have more compassion for myself. Right. And realizing that the feeling that I have of unforgiveness or the desire to shame someone else over something that is so entirely unrelated, and yet I have related it somehow to that first thing without realizing it. So that's why I say it's so important to go deep into our own measures of shame and to recognize that we have it. And shame, there's no reason to be ashamed of the fact that we have shame. It's like being depressed over being depressed. If you add that other layer, it's just like, why bother? You're already depressed.
Carlos and I like Dr. Mario Martinez, and he had some interesting things to say about shame. He said that shame is one of those devastating emotions in the body, and he described it as being hot, as being inflammatory. So shame is an inflammatory emotion. Fear is kind of a freezing, isolating, cold emotion, and shame is inflammatory because we do blush and we do feel hot, and we can all sort of intuitively understand that there is an inflammatory aspect to that emotion of shame when we feel it in ourselves. Shame is one of those things that, first of all, can last a really long time, right? It's one of those things. Some of our earliest negative memories are shame-based memories, right? We tend to go back to images from childhood because it's still burning, it's still smoldering. It's like a forest fire where the roots catch on fire and it's still smoldering for like months and months under the soil, and then later on some other part of the forest catches on fire when it comes up, But I think even though shame is inflammatory in nature, it's also important to remember that inflammation, in a very real sense, I'm talking about like actual inflammation in a person's body, is necessary for healing, right? We don't heal very well without inflammation. And I'm always reminded of a time when I was in China where they were talking about how I was at an orthopedic hospital, and they were taking patients that had non-healing fractures that had gone on a long time and they're not healing, and they'd tried to do surgery and these fractures wouldn't heal. They would just simply get some Staphylococcus bacteria and they'd kill it and then inject the dead bacteria into the fracture site to generate inflammation, so to bring the immune system in there to heal it. Right?
It's like prolotherapy.
Yeah, it's a lot like
a form of prolotherapy.
Yeah. And it was very effective, and it caused most of these fractures to start to heal, right? Because they weren't healing. So from an emotional perspective, something in us, in our psyche, in our spirit is, damaged, broken, and there's an inflammatory response. And we often want that inflammatory response to go away because inflammation is bad. Bad, right? And shame is all about bad, right? And really, I think there's some value in everybody understanding that, this inflammation of shame, this fire that's happening in me that I'm experiencing as shame is my higher self's immune system coming in and trying to point things out and to fix things. And it can be painful and cause swelling and, swollen egos and all kinds of things that happen, but inflammation is just a sign. It's a symptom. It's not bad. It's just a symptom.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with my experience working with people in a coaching space, because you're there to transform feelings and transform their experience. But often the idea is that this is a bad thing, like you say, like this is bad that I have these feelings. And for a long time, I've had this maybe a theory or whatever, an idea that I work with, which is if we trust the unconscious mind, if we trust the deepest part of our unconscious mind, but we're simultaneously talking about our subconscious doing stuff that's not good, right? We talk about, I didn't do this consciously. It's this unconscious habit I have that's doing all this bad stuff, or I'm attracting the wrong partners, or I'm doing this bad activity that's dangerous for me, or whatever it is. But although this may not be actually true, it seems like there's a surface, and then if you go deeper, that there's this thing underneath. And if you trust that that genius is in there, maybe the thing that you're seeing is it's pushing it out. Mm-hmm. Like what you're witnessing as a bad experience or a bad habit or a series of bad relationships or whatever, that the deep mind is putting that in front of you so that you get so uncomfortable that you have to deal with it. If you have that idea of trust, then what it is you're really seeking when you're working to facilitate healing is to get people to respect an even deeper place inside of them than the part of them that's experiencing the negativity. And by doing that regularly, you're working with the psychic immune system, the emotional immune system, and you're getting that to be encouraged to be more resilient. Because resilience is ultimately what you want, because you can't control the outside world, but you can certainly do a lot with your inside world. Anyway,
I like that a lot. That really resonates with me too. In my experience, working with clients that have more physical conditions, because Chinese medicine says that almost all conditions are caused by what they, if you translate into English, it would be affect damage. So damage caused by your emotions, basically, emotional damage. It's funny enough that they consider things like food to be like an exterior cause of illness. But most illnesses are caused by emotions, by damage from the 7 emotions. And well, gosh, I love what you're talking about, because it's almost like, how do you know there's a splinter in your skin if it doesn't fester a little bit?
Yeah, you
create some
need
pain.
That discomfort helps you to do something about it.
Yeah, definitely.
And it brought you to the doctor's office or to the coaching office or wherever it is you go.
Yeah, right.
To the mountain.
To the cave.
Yeah.
It affirms for me that dealing with something that is showing up as it's showing up is the doorway in. One of the reasons I work with divorce, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the last one, but I don't really care about the divorce. To me, it's a prime opportunity to address certain issues that are coming up as a result of the new circumstance that is the divorce, that has probably come up many times before. And in going through the breakup, which is taxing in every possible way, setting an intention for how we want to move through this, and understanding how we want to behave through this, and then trickling that, going deeper into what will it take for us to be able to behave in this way and practice it through this situation. So that by the end of it, we've actually built muscles around what it takes to be the kind of person that I can then look back on and be proud of. We're so much more, our progress, our evolution is so much more effective when we do, like you said, look at what's showing up right now and use that as the doorway.
When you were speaking earlier about shame, it reminded me of this idea that I had heard, I think John Morgan, he may or may not know who he is, but he's an interesting fellow. He wrote something on Facebook, and it was all about self-hatred. And at the end, my first reaction was, no, I don't feel that. And then I realized, wait a minute, like within a second, I'm like, there's something inside of this that triggered me. And I realized it was self-hatred. You know what I mean? It's like self-loathing, like, oh. And it was simple stuff, really simple stuff. Like when you forget something, shoot, I should have, you should all over yourself, right? That's kind of... Yeah.
Wouldn't it be fun if we could train ourselves to speak like like some kind of British nature documentary voiceover? It says, and there it is, shaming itself
Yeah.
for forgetting something naturally.
Yeah.
You know, interesting how it walks back into the office to go retrieve the cell phone after it got all the way to the van, which actually happened to me today. And I did the same doggone thing, right? I'm like, oh, my phone.
Yeah.
You know, and then I started walking back and I was kind of getting on myself, you know, and then I started thinking differently about how, you know, maybe I was safe from an accident, or maybe I was, you know what I mean? I started, you know, but
You reframed it.
yeah, I like the David Attenborough documentary thing.
Love it.
That's
I might
brilliant.
love it.
I love
Yeah.
that.
We could just install that. It would
Just do
certainly
that. Yeah, there must be an app
change things.
or something, you know.
There's an app for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-shaming, self-loathing, self-hatred, all that stuff. You know, what if we loved ourselves, had compassion for ourselves, understood that at a deepest possible level, and how might that affect how we treat others?
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, what if the self-loathing, shaming, self-hatred is an opportunity to love ourselves?
Yeah.
Because we can't really do much about our brain. Our mind is geared to look for the funky stuff, you know, what's the danger, what's wrong, what's happening, you know? And so I almost don't want to shame myself for having a perfectly normal brain that does that. But my response is then it's an opportunity to recognize the animal part of me, the primitive part of me that does that, and to adore that, and to recognize that it's also out of its league in this particular situation, and to have compassion around that, and to not shame my animal for that. You know?
That's right. I remember from our first episode we did. Yeah, and I've loved when you talked about, you know, your body's your first pet.
Yeah.
And there you are, treating your pet nicely.
Yeah.
Because we love pets. you
Petalyn
know?
is kind to animals.
Our body is our first pet. Take care of it. Struggle, release, flow, 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 flow. Take care of it, take care of it.
Petalyn, this has been really interesting. All the stuff that we talk about with you goes deep. And I know you've got volumes and volumes and universes within universes to explore. What are you working on currently that's intriguing, important, that you'd like to share?
I'm very excited to sort of figure out how to bring all of this brain noodling, you know, to others. And I'm particularly partial to women who see themselves as being strong, see themselves as being high achieving, see themselves as being different than other women typically. And my sense is that, like everybody else, they deal with their own brand of shame, and it's buried even deeper because they don't allow themselves to ever go there. And I believe that the topic of forgiveness and shame requires a tremendous amount of courage and inner strength and a good hefty pair of balls, whether you wear them on the inside or the outside. And I think of human beings like that as being true warriors. So, to answer your question, I am working on an online program right now that I'm really, really excited about, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out, but because it's the first time I put anything online, that is called Meet Your Amazon. And so I'm doing a lot of research right now on actual, true, red-blooded Amazons through history, tribes of Amazons, and so on, Scythian Amazons, African, and such. And because there's more and more evidence of them out there, and things that have been buried.
The warrior women.
Warrior women, huntresses,
Woman,
you know, guardians of the kings, you know. And what I love about these kinds of women is that their range is so broad. You know, they can take on that fire, the capacity to hunt, the capacity to protect, the capacity to kill if they need to, and they can nurture and love. And as well, so their range to me is admirable, and I feel like that range is so often stifled for a number of reasons, or they feel like it is, you know, and so they tend to be more covert about their strength and their brawn, if you will, their natural internal brawn. So the program is to find some way, some in to help women like us to deal with their shame so that they no longer feel the constraint, to whatever extent they do, to play by anyone else's rules, and to find one another. I think the isolation, they often feel like islands, and the isolation is what, I truly have a little fantasy. It's like, what if we got so many of these women together?
Yeah.
I mean, oh my God,
The tribe,
find
yeah.
our own island,
Yeah.
what could we do? And then I hear this voice in my head, the Dalai Lama said it will take the Western woman to change the world. And it's just like, it'll take the Amazon woman to change the world, the woman. And I don't just mean women, but human beings, as exemplified in these women who give full expression to their range unapologetically.
No apologies.
No
Yeah.
apologies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been really good. Great conversation.
Very good.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Very special thanks to our guest, Petalyn Albert. If you'd like to get in touch with Petalyn, you can find her website at heartfueled.com, or you can also find her at thenlpadvantage.com. This show was produced by Oliver Altine. That's me. Our theme song, which you're listening to right now, was composed, recorded, and performed by Oliver Altine, and that's me again. Yep, I wear a lot of hats around here. Please subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on social media. Send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.